My question is, are Rishi Sunak's green policies in tatters?
Well, the Prime Minister said today that he is committed to reaching net zero by 2050, but says any new green measures must be proportionate and pragmatic. The mood music, certainly from the Prime Minister, is, should we say, somewhat less equivocal on the environment than maybe Boris Johnson or David Cameron certainly were.
It is interesting, right? Because I actually don't necessarily disagree. I think Michael Gove has got a clip that we can watch a bit as well. Probably more interesting, actually, than what we're hearing on Cross Question here today, where Michael Gove on Sky News said, what we can't do is push so much policy that it turns the public opinion against green policy. And that's actually super smart, right? Because it's identical to the advice that I was giving to the Green Party on stream yesterday, when I was specifically saying, well, what the Green Party can't do is push away people on green policy by saying, well, you're going to have to definitely ensure that your standard of living drops into the toilet to be able to make sure that our green policy goes through, right? That's what leads to this green agenda style conspiracy theory, this climate hoax conspiracy to try and turn you into little boxes on the within the 15-minute city or whatever. That's where the climate scam conspiracy theory kind of starts from. And it's super important because you really and truly do need to make your policies appealing in a way that it gets voters on side. Because in general in this country, right? In general in this country, people really do care about the environment. In fact, across Europe, you can't really get away with not being pro policies to deal with climate changes. Even Marine Le Pen and people like that, they just have to capitulate and have something that is a policy to mitigate climate change within a manifesto that they run on. Otherwise, you just can't win votes, right? People in the global north have finally cottoned on after 40 years that climate change is a really important issue. And I'm glad that that's kind of turned around, etc., etc. But what you can't do is you can't push people away on policy. You have to ensure that you keep policy in a way that mitigates it as much as you can without turning people off of actually voting these policies through. I know that's going to sound really technocratic and dull to hear me say you can't be unelectable, because I'm sure we've all heard on the left about the issue with electability in politics, given that they keep telling us that loads of things that we want are unelectable when the public generally support them, right? But there's an issue with carrot and stick, and Solly is correct in chat. You have to help out poorer people. That's where, even though I think that we've overdone the ULEZ discourse far too much at this point, if there's ever a sticking point on this, it's you punish poor people because they're the ones who are less likely to have the environmentally ready cars. They're the people who are less likely to have the ability to be able to refinance to get a better car unless there's government support. And that's what the government support is supposed to be there for the poor people to get into a position where they can afford to be more environmentally friendly. You can't just do this, right? You can't just do what the government would do, which is just specifically push for moving to electric cars, banning petrol vehicles. Because electric cars, I'm going to let you on a secret of this one, chap. I'm going to let you on to a really, really tiny secret. Electric cars are garbage. It's a complete boondoggle. It's nonsense. Screw electric cars. I hate them. Because electric cars still take loads of fossil fuels to build. You still have to mine your cobalt or your lithium from countries in the global south. And it doesn't change the living spaces of our cities that are like 90% of which are devoted to motorists. That's a real problem that we have. But what you can't also do is pass policies that just say, take away people's cars, force you to buy this car, make sure there's no space for you to drive on. You can't do that either, because that also loses your votes as well. What you have to do, what Green Party politicians, what Conservative Party politicians, what Labour politicians, what everybody has to do, you have to induce demand. You have to induce demand. You have to get people out of their cars and into public transport. And you can't do that by just banning cars. You can't do that by telling people that they're evil for driving a car. It will never work. They can't afford to buy an electric one. They don't want to move away from their regular one by force. You have to induce demand by not building extra roads, but building more public transport infrastructure to be able to break the demand, to induce the demand elsewhere. Just build trains, right? Build lots of good trains, right? And this is where the Conservatives are currently failing on carbon policy, on climate change policy. Sure, they can virtue signal all they want, because let's be real, that's what a lot of this is. Like Boris Johnson doing these deals with these bus companies for hydrogen-powered buses with hydrogen that's being shipped over from Australia, like that's going to be environmentally friendly, really and truly. When all this is deflection and virtue signaling away from the fact that they need to spend government money on new rail. That's the only thing that's going to work. More new rail, more new bus infrastructure, nationalise them to make them cheap so that people are not incentivised to use their cars. You have to use an incentive out of cars rather than a disincentive to stop them using cars. Because again, people will just vote against you. People will just not agree with your policy if you're being heavy-handed and saying we're going to get rid of cars. Do I want to ban cars? Yeah, I do want to ban cars. I hate cars. I hate car-centric infrastructure. I hate the fact that so much of where we live is devoted to ensure that there is continual road access for people in these great hulking tons of metal. But I understand that I have a minority opinion on this, and I don't want to be the central committee to get rid of everybody's cars forever. I don't want to do that because it's not popular. It's not going to win you any votes. But what does win you votes is infrastructure spending. It's promising to make people's lives better, increase their standard of living through new infrastructure. It's also good for the economy as well. The kind of the green growth narrative, which I think is one that Green Party should be running with. I get the reasons for degrowth. GDP is a crappy measure. There are reasons why I think that degrowth in general is a fine, general kind of holistic idea, but you need to be able to frame your ideas that you want to sell to a voting population in ways that will benefit them, that will increase their living standards. And saying, I'm building new bus lanes, I am nationalising the bus company and dropping fares. That's what Andy Burnham's doing in Manchester. Andy Burnham's going to be reducing fares down to like £2 for a bus journey, which, you know, to be fair, was the bus journeys I was paying as a kid and back in 2008 to be able to get to Games Workshop to play Warhammer. But even so, well, there's clearly a massive reduction on what fares look like at the moment. We have to have integrated transport to make it easier to be able to use as well. You need to keep your ticket offices to give access to everybody. And this is going to involve so much more investment. And the Conservative government doesn't want to do it. And that's the problem. Unless the state properly finances these things to induce demand away from cars and from motorists and from roads, we will not solve this problem. Because banning cars isn't a policy that gets any votes, and neoliberal politics does not want to engage in public investment in infrastructure, which is the only method that you can use to solve this issue. I get why ULEZ is important, but we want to ensure that we kind of recycle our what car stock that we do have. We want to recycle that into something that's a little more energy efficient with lower emissions, right? We have a massive problem with air pollution. And I'm not saying we need to get rid of ULEZ or anything, because air pollution is different from climate policy, even though they're kind of linked. These are also two separate sections of policy. And as long as we have state investment and state subsidy for poor people to be able to get the help that they need to move into something with lower emissions, then you're going to be sensible, right? Because if we leave it, right, if we just leave trying to force people to become green rather than incentivizing it, rather than changing the patterns of demand, you're going to end up with people like Dan Wootton, right? Our favourite accused catfisher, Martin Branning himself, Dan Wootton, talking about reversing a net zero hellscape that threatens climate calamity. Because it doesn't do that. Let's watch and let's debunk what he's saying here. But the gigantic irony of all of this is the anti-net zero people want to try and say that moving away from oil and gas is somehow going to be economically damaging, when in fact it's going to be a boost to the economy, because we'll no longer be relying on the incredibly mercurial global wholesale prices for oil and gas that we buy from, you know, petrostates part of OPEC, rather than our own homegrown energy security, which is what Rishi Sunak was saying. Rishi Sunak was saying this on Sky News, literally saying, you know, I am helping us build energy security by having more energy at home. And that's a lot of the time some kind of economic nationalism. I think that those of us on the left would be able to impress upon people who usually disagree with us on policy by saying, look, we are becoming more self-sufficient as a nation by focusing on green policy, especially when it's the kind of green policy that, you know, Ed Miliband was championing, where we put that down into the community. We have community ownership, right? Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, these are countries that are spearheading consumer cooperatives for energy generation. That's the kind of model I want to see. Local communities generating their own energy for their own uses, rather than us being continually ripped off by Centrica selling us overinflated gas prices, or politically difficult policies on these big state programs for new energy, which do need to happen, by the way. I'm not saying that they don't, but it's an easier sell to people by saying, look, if we build a cooperatively owned, community-owned solar array in your area, this can be used to sell electricity to the national grid, and that money can be used to bring council tax bills down. Because, you know, something that unites basically everybody in this country is keeping council tax low, and that's a way that you can get this policy pushed through to people who would otherwise disagree with you. Let's watch Dan Wootton and try and debunk the things that he's saying about this. Sorry. Let's not dead name him, right? We're going to watch Martin Branning, his real name. Let's not dead name. We're inclusive on this channel.
Is low traffic neighbourhoods, green levy taxes, heat pumps by stealth, the march towards 15-minute cities, banning petrol and diesel vehicles, outlawing gas boilers in the months and years to come. Those policies, part of the deranged march to net zero, will become as unpopular as the poll tax. So the electoral opportunity for a party to stand up for the pocketbook and lifestyles of hardworking Brits over the doom-mongering climate cultists is now overwhelming.
And the thing is, what's kind of ironic is this is completely not true. People do want these things. People overwhelmingly support pro-climate policy, right? People really genuinely, there's so many statistics that you can find to see that people do want to see action taken. But the more we push policy that pushes people away by engaging in things like wholesale bans and lack of investment, and things that look to the average voter like they create a lack of economic opportunity and a drop in living standards, the more that people like Martin Branning over here can weaponize that to move voters over. And that's what's really important, because you can see the kind of narrative that Mr. Branning here is trying to be able to build up. And you have to be as smart as you can about policy to be able to do that. You really, really do. And this is where the Green Party fall down, by trying to oppose infrastructure, because people like infrastructure spending. Who doesn't like infrastructure spending? We all like seeing more amenities, more access. Like, that's something that unites the whole country. And so Green Party and, conservative parties, these are pushing people away by doing so. The Green Party, because they have well-meaning but poorly crafted policies around environmental protection, and the Conservatives because they're NIMBYs who don't want to engage in state investment, because that goes against the neoliberal orthodoxy that they've been accepting as rote scripture since 1979, for example. But there isn't an electoral opportunity for this yet. Other than a bunch of kind of GB News headbangers, there really isn't an electoral coalition for this. People who really truly care about being anti-net zero would be voting for Reform UK. Is anybody voting for Reform UK? Despite the fact that every single head honcho in their organisation is getting loads of screen time on Talk TV and GB News? No, they keep doing badly because no one cares about them, because they don't offer policies people want, right? They're anti-immigration and they're pro-Brexit, people want those, but people don't want free market Singapore on Thames, they don't want to be anti-net zero, and they don't want fracking, which are like three big policies that Reform UK stand for.
But who will have the guts to challenge the globalist orthodoxy and do what they know is right? We saw the possibilities on Friday. I mean, sure, it was a disastrous night for Rishi Sunak's Conservatives, but the widely predicted shellacking of the Tories did not happen in Uxbridge and South Ruislip for one reason, and one reason only. Failed London Mayor Sadiq Khan's ULEZ. A policy...
And the thing is, what's incredibly so stupid about Labour comms is that in their desire to undermine Sadiq Khan in the name of their party brand, they're lending credence to people like Mr. Branning over here to continue to say, well, they've talked about Labour literally briefing to the press, we lost because of ULEZ. They're leaping up, they're jumping on it, right? A tiny bit of expectation management, a tiny bit of, proper politics and discussion around what they assumed to be a win at Uxbridge not actually being a win at Uxbridge has let Mr. Branning here off the hook, just go, ha, well, they said it was ULEZ, so it must be, and Labour are failing electorally because of it, and they will absolutely take every single tiny little inkling that they can to be able to attack this policy that they want to try and freeze into the public consciousness. And, at the moment, they're failing miserably because there is so much consensus on the need for green policy at the moment in the UK. But as soon as that dial turns enough, with poor policy, poor rhetoric, poor communications, and poor publicity for green policy, this could theoretically grow. It's not at the moment, but if Starmer and Reeves and co continue just kind of kicking the can down the road, we will be in this position sooner rather than later. And again, Labour were unlikely to win Uxbridge anyway, but because they've failed in managing expectations, we're now getting this whole bloody sing and dance about ULEZ, which we needn't be having. We needn't be having any of this.
Labour Deputy Angela Rayner vows to now be rolled out throughout the country.
Conservatives were the ones that started the ULEZ scheme and put us on this track, but both Labour and the Conservatives now need to really reflect on that and come up with a scheme, because this isn't just about London, this is coming to towns and cities across the whole of the United Kingdom.
It's interesting, Morinarchy, that you talk about the backlash to the boiler stuff in Germany, and Alternative for Deutschland has been taking advantage of it, and you're absolutely right, they have been. And you know what that's a failure of? It's a failure of the Green Party communication strategy. It's a failure of Green Party policy. It's exactly the same thing that's going to damn the Green Party in the UK, which is why you need to join and change their policy platform in this to make it far more pro-growth, right? You need to get involved and say, look, we're going to lose elections, we're going to lose seats that are desperately needed to move the rhetoric from the Labour Party from how right-wing it is. If we lose these seats because if we are not providing policy that we want to impress upon people is not going to impact their living standards, we'll end up like the German Greens, who nicked German nuclear, and then when got exploded, suddenly their background to having to be on the defensive and being attacked on attacking people's energy security, on things like the gas boilers, etc. That's an easy route to attack green policy, like we're seeing here from Mr. Branning, specifically saying, well, you can't have the green policy because it will lead to a drop in living standards. And this is the key thing. I cannot impress enough why this is the key issue here. We have to only frame these things as far as living standards are concerned, because so many green policies are excellent at improving living standards. Cheap energy in your community, reducing your council tax bills, for example, new infrastructure on these things, that is golden, right? We're going to reduce your council tax bills with this environmental renewable energy cooperative in your local area. Instant, excellent way of getting people to be able to vote for you. Energy security and lower council tax bills, the two things people really do want in the wake of council tax bills going up and us having a gigantic energy crisis.
Contrast that to the approach of Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove, who warned against a religious crusade over environmental extremism. noting the evangelical approach of campaign groups. Plans to ditch the £118 hydrogen levy on fuel bills, provide landlords more time to meet energy efficiency targets, and a so-called Aston Martin exemption to give small car makers longer to convert to electric before that insane deadline is a start, but it's not enough. The banning of petrol or diesel vehicles by 2030 must be scrapped altogether. It is a completely unrealistic, arbitrary target. Likewise, by the way, the ban on gas boilers by 2035, which will cause ordinary Brits just unbelievable pain.
And that's why you have to focus, rather than on this forced change, on inducing the demand, right? Engaging in subsidy. If you want to get people to use heat pumps, you're going to have to subsidise the bloody heat pumps, right? You can't just expect people to shell out money that they don't have in a cost of living crisis to change to an environmentally friendly option, unless you can explain to them how it's going to be better for their living standards overall. And that's where the subsidy is going to have to come in. And unless you can make electric cars affordable, then, this ban on petrol cars is just going to stop people from driving altogether, or indeed not be able to get you to vote for them in the first place. Because again, we don't need to reconvert all of our cars from petrol to electric if everyone's using public transport because it's cheaper and cleaner and quicker and more efficient, because we've nationalised it, we've invested in it, and we've made it back to the leaders in train travel that we used to be at the turn of the last century, rather than right now where we're seen as the dirty man of Europe.
Now that would set Sunak's Tories apart from the Green ideologues and Labour, like Khan, who is refusing to back down and has made clear he will push ahead with the ULEZ expansion come what may. But earlier today, the Prime Minister appeared in two minds over where the Conservatives stand.
Yes, we're going to make progress towards net zero, but we're going to do that in a proportionate and pragmatic way that doesn't unnecessarily
Is pragmatic a word? Answers in the comments.
give people more hassle and more costs in their life. That's what I'm not interested and prepared to do.
Now, even if
And again, this is exactly the rhetoric that is good from anyone who cares about the climate emergency. Rishi Sunak is clearly someone who's much better at rhetoric than Keir Starmer is. And I hate to sit here and agree with Michael Gove and Rishi Sunak. I disagree with the length to which they want to actually change policy to make things far more energy efficient. I disagree with them on the actual policy platform that they stand on. But as far as rhetoric is concerned, they absolutely understand how they need to frame their arguments. That's how the framing has to be. Let's make sure that these things are done in a pragmatic fashion that do not affect the living standards of British people. And other parties are going to lose on this. It's only the miracle of, the mortgage crisis of the Conservative government that's led us to the position where these people are not going to be voted in at the next election.
he did scale back on the Green agenda, there's not an easy road for victory for Sunak. Let's just be honest about it. The celebrated pollster, Matt Goodwin, made clear over the weekend the results are still catastrophic, with an average 21-point loss of support, swings not seen since New Labour in the 90s. As Goodwin warns, many of their own voters are now refusing to vote at all, much like they did in the late 1990s, sitting at home wondering where all the proper Conservatives have gone, then emailing me to say they're utterly fed up and want something radically different. Is
because consumer choice has now changed so much that this is the new norm. If anything could tell you, could signal to you where public opinion is, look at what the corporations are trying to pander to. You can tell our country is more accepting of gay people, is more happy to commit towards green policy, because these corporations will continue to virtue signal about how green they are, about how pro-LGBT they are. Obviously, this is all nonsense, right? This is all virtue signaling. None of this has any basis in actual fact in the kinds of things that these companies do. But because they want to pander to the majority public opinion, this is how you can tell that it is public opinion, because the marketeers for these companies get paid huge amounts of money, right? Loads of money to understand how to market products. And if marketing to pro-LGBT people and pro-climate action people wasn't profitable, they would not be doing it, given how much they get paid, right? It's not, as many writers will try and tell you, some corporate plot from the World Economic Forum to make you eat the bugs and to take away everything that you know and love in the name of the global elite's climate scam, for example. People like green policy, as every poll will say, and corporations want to virtue signal to these people to get them to buy their products. Are these companies actually engaging in green policy at all? Well, no, of course they're not, because that's not what's profitable. Unless people will genuinely boycott you for not doing so, which of course nobody actually really truly does. People will like to gravitate towards things they think are conscious purchases, when really and truly they just want the product that speaks to them, and they're not going to boycott a whole company who lies to them about their green credentials. They just care about the credentials existing in the first place when it comes to the kind of snap decisions that you make when you engage in consumption.
Sunak has no more time to steady the ship. The moment has come to be bold and reverse the net zero hellscape threatening economic calamity and lifestyle degradation on the folk who deserve that the least. And remember,
those who lifestyle degradation, right? That's exactly what they're going to go down. That's exactly the kind of language you're going to hear from people who oppose pro-climate policy. That's why every single thing you talk about the climate has to be about standard of living. You have to counteract this narrative. You cannot let them seize the narrative on this one, especially considering with response to something like you, Les, where Labour have really dropped the ball and allowed it to become national discourse for no reason.
the UK is already leading the developed world in cutting carbon emissions anyway. We've done our bit.
The way he speaks is so indicative of someone reading from a script. It's so fake, such a grift. You know what? He actually speaks like someone who is trying to speak very slowly, the hard of hearing people in an old people's home. The kind of patronising tone that idiots do for old people they think somehow are engaging in cognitive decline. That's exactly how he sounds. But yeah, I mean, maybe we are, maybe we aren't engaging in the fastest transition towards net zero possible. But we should, until we're at net zero, we are still a problem. And still we're at a point at which we are not being net zero or net negative on carbon. We are still contributing to the global problem of carbon emissions. And that needs to change. We're seeing at the moment where the Gulf Stream might end by 2025. We're seeing ice flows still decreasing at times when in previous years they have been increasing in the amount of ice in the Arctic Circle, for example. We're seeing the picture, I don't know if anybody's seen the pictures from Sicily today, or the pictures from Rhodes in a couple of days ago, or from Corfu, where Europe is literally on fire. Now, I'm going to pull back from a lot of these statements by saying I think it's really counterintuitive and counteractive to our points to keep saying, look, this individual situation of a place in Europe that's on fire, right? Of course, we know from the kind of environmental changes that have happened because of climate change, these things are going to be more likely. But by trying to say to somebody, look at the fires in Europe, this is a climate change problem, that's exactly like them coming back to us and saying, well, it's raining in July now, clearly climate change isn't happening. We can't point to individual events and just say, look, climate change is obvious, because unless somebody already agrees with you, they're not going to have their mind changed by it. We have to rely on data, hard data and analysis and averages and medians and all that kind of malarkey. You have to say, look, overall, the temperature is increasing by this much on average. Overall, ice is decreasing by this much on average. Overall, the proportion of carbon in our atmosphere has reached this certain amount. And we have to link these three things together, because you can't just point to somebody and say, look, big fire, and then suddenly believe in climate change. Because that's identical to the argument of it's snowing in, whatever month it might be in America, therefore climate change is an issue. Because it clearly is an issue. But anecdotes are not data. But this thing will continue to happen, and it will continue to get worse. That's the thing to impress upon people who already agree with you about the issue of climate change, but don't quite agree with you on the necessary pace of the change in policy that surrounds it. Because at the end of the day, when people keep saying, well, that's going to come, the charity starts at home. If you want to actually affect the climate crisis, you're going to have to consume as environmentally friendly as possible. You're going to have to change all of your own personal lifestyle. You're going to have to change how you consume, right? And I don't necessarily disagree that you should be doing those things, because, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. It's not a carte blanche to consume as unethically as you possibly like. But what is important is focusing on policy, because at the end of the day, whole-scale political change is the only thing that will actually deal with the climate crisis. No amount of individual changes in behaviour is going to change the failures of production in this country. There's a really great video I was watching on TradLogic stream of the Amazon warehouse taking loads of new products that were not economically viable to actually have on shelves to make room for other new products that are being sold. But of course, under capitalism, under neoliberal capitalism, it's not good for business to give these products that are unsellable away for free because they devalue your existing stock that you hold at the moment. There's massive overproduction. This is not Malthusianism, right? I'm not talking about overconsumption. I'm talking about overproduction of goods, which is what drives consumptive habits, right? No one needs a new phone every 2 years. No one needs new technology every 2 years, but we buy it because we get sold it to us, right? It's an issue of production, not of consumption. And in this Amazon warehouse, all these spare things, but which couldn't get sold, they just got destroyed. They just got destroyed for no reason because they cannot devalue their existing stock by having more previously sellable product in circulation as far as the secondhand market is concerned. And that is the deep rot at the heart of neoliberalism. That's all of the fast fashion that litters the Atacama Desert. That's an issue with overproduction, not overconsumption. And that's another thing that you have to change people's minds on. You can't just tell people you have to consume differently because, again, they will come at you and say, well, this is going to reduce my standard of living. You have to talk about the failures in production that causes this consumption to happen in the first place, the way in which we induce demand. We do induce demand on fast fashion, for example, by it being made by sweatshops in the Philippines and being shipped to us to be able to consume to our heart's content with no ramifications for the repercussions of those, because the production is the problem, not the consumption. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. It does help out the channel and the algorithm. And if you click the bell notification icon, it will let you know when I go live and when I upload videos. If you'd like to follow me on social media, my handle is @NoJusticeMTG, and that is Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. If you want to support my channel in a more financial manner, you can do so by becoming a member for just 99p, by super chatting, or by supporting me on Patreon, with the link is in the description of this video, and hopefully I'll catch you on the next segment.